Miss Marple and the Lost Babies. The late September sun cast long shadows across the lawn of Thornfield House, where the annual harvest garden party was in full swing. Crystal glasses caught the light as they clinked together, and the gentle murmur of conversation drifted across the manicured grounds like the hum of contented bees. Miss Jane Marple sat in a wicker chair near the rose arbor, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on what appeared to be a small pink cardigan. Her keen blue eyes, however, were not on her needles but on the assembled company, taking in every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift in posture that might tell its own story. "Such a lovely party, Mrs. Ashford," gushed Mrs. Bantry, resplendent in her new autumn hat adorned with artificial cherries. "And how wonderful that dear Clarissa could make it home for the occasion." Helena Ashford, the hostess, smiled tightly. At 55, she remained a handsome woman, though recent years had etched fine lines around her mouth and eyes. "Yes, we're delighted to have her back from London, though I do wish she'd given us more notice." Miss Marple's needles paused for just a moment. There was something in Helena's tone, not quite disapproval, but certainly unease. She glanced toward where Clarissa Ashford stood near the refreshment table, a striking woman of 30, with auburn hair that caught fire in the sunlight. Clarissa was speaking animatedly to Dr. Marcus Pemberton, the village physician, though his attention seemed divided between her words and something beyond her shoulder. "I do hope nothing's wrong," Mrs. Bantry continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "One hears such stories about young women in London these days. Why, my nephew tells me—" "Nothing's wrong at all," Helena interrupted, her smile growing more fixed. "Clarissa simply decided she missed village life. After 5 years in the city, I suppose one does long for simpler things." Miss Marple stored this exchange away in her mind, filing it alongside her observation that Clarissa's dress, while stylish, showed signs of careful mending at the hem, and that her laugh, though bright, had an edge of brittleness to it. The garden party continued its gentle course. The vicar, Reverend Timothy Holt, discussed the upcoming harvest festival with Colonel Bantry, while his wife Grace helped serve tea alongside the Ashfords' housekeeper, Mrs. Jennings. Young Peter Ashford, Helena's nephew who lived at Thornfield House, skulked near the greenhouse, clearly finding the whole affair tedious. It was then that Nurse Margaret Fowler arrived, slightly out of breath, her usually immaculate uniform showing signs of haste. She was a solid, competent woman in her 40s who had served as the village's district nurse for the past 15 years. "So sorry I'm late," she apologized to Helena. "Emergency at the Willows. Poor Mrs. Crawford took a tumble." "Nothing serious, I hope?" Dr. Pemberton had materialized at the nurse's elbow with remarkable speed. "Just a sprained ankle, doctor. Though at her age—" Nurse Fowler accepted a cup of tea gratefully. "I've been run off my feet lately. It seems half the village has decided to fall ill at once." "The change of seasons," Dr. Pemberton said smoothly. "It always brings its troubles." Miss Marple noticed how his eyes kept drifting back to Clarissa, who was now in conversation with James Morrison, the local solicitor. Morrison, a bachelor in his late 30s with prematurely greying temples, appeared to be hanging on her every word. "Clarissa seems to be quite the center of attention," observed Millicent Price, the postmistress, who had appeared at Miss Marple's side. Millicent had occupied her position for 20 years and prided herself on knowing everything about everyone in the village. "Young women often are," Miss Marple replied mildly, her needles never ceasing their rhythm. "Though I remember when she left for London, she couldn't wait to escape what she called this suffocating little place." "People change," Millicent said, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it. "Still, it is odd, her coming back so suddenly. And have you noticed she hasn't once mentioned what she actually did in London? For all her chatter, she's remarkably close-mouthed about specifics." Before Miss Marple could respond, a crash echoed across the lawn. Peter Ashford had knocked over a tray of glasses near the greenhouse, sending crystal shards scattering across the flagstones. "Peter," Helena's voice was sharp with more than just annoyance. "For heaven's sake, boy, can't you be more careful?" The young man, who couldn't have been more than 22, flushed dark red. "Sorry, Aunt Helena. I'll clean it up." "Leave it," she snapped. "Mrs. Jennings will see to it. Why don't you make yourself useful and help with—" Her words were cut short by a piercing scream from inside the house. For a moment, the entire garden party froze, as if transformed into a tableau vivant. Then Dr. Pemberton and several others rushed toward the French doors, leading into Thornfield House. Miss Marple set down her knitting with deliberate care and rose from her chair. As she made her way across the lawn, she noticed several things in quick succession. Clarissa Ashford had gone very pale and gripped James Morrison's arm for support. Peter Ashford remained by the greenhouse, his face a mask of something that might have been fear or guilt, and Nurse Fowler, practical as always, was already following the doctor into the house, her medical bag in hand. The scream had come from the morning room, where Mrs. Jennings stood in the doorway, her face white as parchment, one hand pressed to her mouth. "What is it, Mrs. Jennings?" Dr. Pemberton demanded. The housekeeper could only point with a trembling finger into the room. There, slumped in a wing-back chair facing the garden, was Eleanor Whitfield, the Ashfords' elderly neighbour. Her eyes were open but unseeing, and her face had taken on an unmistakable bluish tinge. "She's dead," Dr. Pemberton announced, after a brief examination. "Appears to be cyanosis, some form of poisoning, I'd say." Helena Ashford swayed on her feet. But she was just in the garden not 20 minutes ago. She said she felt tired and wanted to rest for a moment. Miss Marple's gaze travelled from the dead woman to the small side table next to her chair. A teacup sat there, its contents barely touched. But it was what lay beside the cup that made her eyes narrow. Thoughtfully, a small hand-knitted baby's bootie in pale yellow wool. "Nobody touch anything," Colonel Bantry declared, taking charge with military efficiency. "We must call the police at once." As the assembled company milled about in shock and confusion, Miss Marple bent to examine the bootie more closely without touching it. It was beautifully made, with an intricate pattern she recognized. She had knitted something very similar herself once, years ago, for her nephew's first child. "How very odd," she murmured to herself. "Very odd indeed." For Eleanor Whitfield had been a spinster all her life, with no children, no nieces or nephews, and no reason whatsoever to have a baby's bootie in her possession. And yet here it was, placed with apparent deliberation beside her final cup of tea. As the wail of police sirens began to echo in the distance, Miss Marple straightened up and looked around the morning room with thoughtful eyes. The garden party had come to an abrupt and tragic end. But she had the distinct feeling that the real drama was only just beginning. For in her experience, when mysterious baby clothes appeared at the scene of a suspicious death, there were always secrets, old, painful secrets waiting to be uncovered. And in a village like this, where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did, secrets had a way of being particularly deadly. By the following morning, the news of Eleanor Whitfield's death had spread through the village like spilled ink on blotting paper. The post office, the general store and the tea shop buzzed with speculation, each venue offering its own theory about what had transpired at Thornfield House. Miss Marple, arriving at the tea shop for her customary Tuesday morning pot of Earl Grey, found herself immediately accosted by a chorus of voices. "Poisoned, they say," Mrs. Clement, the baker's wife, announced dramatically. "In broad daylight, at a garden party. Whatever is the world coming to?" "I heard it was her heart," countered Miss Weatherby, who ran the lending library. She was 78 after all. These things happen. "Dr. Pemberton said poison," insisted Mrs. Clement, "and he should know. Though what kind of poison works that quickly?" Miss Marple settled herself at her usual table by the window, where she could observe both the interior of the tea shop and the village green beyond. She had barely ordered her tea when Millicent Price slid into the opposite chair, her eyes bright with the importance of one who has information to share. "The police were at Thornfield House until past midnight," Millicent began without preamble. "Inspector Drummond from Much Benham. He's ordered an autopsy, of course." "How very thorough of him," Miss Marple murmured, adding sugar to her tea. "That's not all." Millicent leaned forward conspiratorially. "They found something peculiar with the body. A baby's bootie. Can you imagine? Eleanor Whitfield, of all people, with baby clothes." "Perhaps she was knitting for charity," suggested Miss Marple mildly. "Many of us do." Millicent shook her head vigorously. "Eleanor never knitted a stitch in her life. Couldn't stand what she called fiddle-faddle female occupations. No, this is something else entirely." She paused for effect. "I think it's a message." "A message?" Miss Marple's blue eyes widened innocently. "Whatever do you mean?" "Well, it stands to reason, doesn't it? A baby's bootie beside a dead spinster? Someone's trying to tell us something about children. Secret children, perhaps." Before Miss Marple could respond, the bell above the tea shop door chimed. and Nurse Fowler entered, looking haggard. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually crisp uniform was slightly rumpled. "Margaret," called Mrs. Clement, "do sit down, dear. You look exhausted." The nurse gratefully accepted a chair at a nearby table. "I've been up half the night. Poor Mrs. Crawford's ankle was worse than I thought, and then there was all that dreadful business at Thornfield House." "You were there when they found her," Mrs. Weatherby said eagerly. "Did you see anything unusual?" Nurse Fowler accepted a cup of tea from the shop owner with visible relief. "Apart from the fact that a woman died at a garden party, I should think that was unusual enough." She paused, then added more quietly, "Though there was something odd. When I examined her briefly, you understand, before the police arrived, there were some unusual marks on her wrists, almost like scratches." "She scratched herself?" gasped Mrs. Clement. "Or someone else did," suggested a new voice. James Morrison had entered the tea shop, his solicitor's bearing somewhat diminished by the worry lines creasing his forehead. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing, but surely we shouldn't jump to conclusions before the autopsy results are in." "James is right," Miss Marple said gently, "though I must say, Mr. Morrison, you look rather troubled yourself. I do hope yesterday's events haven't upset you too greatly." The solicitor coloured slightly. "Well, naturally, one is upset when, that is to say, Miss Whitfield was a client of mine. Her death is not only tragic, but also complicated." "Complicated how?" Millicent pounced on the word like a cat on a mouse. Morrison hesitated, clearly torn between professional discretion and the village's hunger for information. "I suppose there's no harm in saying that Miss Whitfield had recently been making inquiries about certain legal matters concerning inheritance and legitimacy." A collective intake of breath greeted this revelation. Miss Marple's knitting needles, which had appeared as if by magic from her capacious handbag, paused in their clicking. "Inheritance," repeated Mrs. Clement. "But Eleanor had no family." "None that we knew of," Morrison corrected carefully. "But she had become quite insistent lately about researching parish records, birth certificates, that sort of thing. She spent hours at the church, going through old registers with Reverend Holt." "How fascinating," murmured Miss Marple. "I wonder what she was looking for." The bell chimed again, and this time Clarissa Ashford entered, wearing a simple black dress that emphasized her pallor. Conversation ceased abruptly as all eyes turned to her. "Good morning," she said with forced brightness. "I thought I'd better come into the village, show my face. Mother's practically barricaded herself in the house, and someone needs to get provisions." "How is your mother, dear?" asked Mrs. Weatherby with genuine concern. "Shattered," Clarissa admitted, sinking into a chair. She and Miss Whitfield had been neighbours for 30 years. To have her die like that, at our party, she shuddered. "We were just discussing," Millicent began, but James Morrison cut her off with a warning look. "We were just saying how shocking it all is," he amended smoothly. "Can I get you some tea, Clarissa?" She smiled at him gratefully. "That would be lovely, James. You're very kind." Miss Marple observed this interaction with interest, noting how Morrison's face softened when he looked at Clarissa, and how she seemed to relax slightly in his presence. Young love, perhaps, though Clarissa's time in London added an element of complexity to what might have been a simple village romance. "I suppose the police have been asking questions," Nurse Fowler said carefully. Clarissa nodded. "They wanted to know about everything: who had access to the morning room, who served the tea, who saw Eleanor last. As if any of us would—" She broke off, biting her lip. "As if any of us would poison an elderly neighbour," Morrison finished firmly. "The very idea is absurd." "Is it?" asked a cold voice from the doorway. Peter Ashford stood there, his young face set in hard lines. "Is it really so absurd? Eleanor Whitfield was a poisonous old witch who lived to make trouble for others. Maybe someone finally had enough." "Peter," Clarissa looked shocked. "How can you say such a thing?" "Because it's true," he retorted. "She was always poking her nose where it didn't belong, spreading gossip, making insinuations. Ask anyone." His gaze swept the tea shop, challenging. "Go on. Tell my cousin how wonderful Eleanor Whitfield was. Tell her how sorry you all are that she's dead." An uncomfortable silence fell. Miss Marple noticed that several people couldn't quite meet Peter's angry gaze. Even Millicent Price, rarely at a loss for words, seemed to find her teacup suddenly fascinating. "Whatever her faults," Nurse Fowler said quietly, No one deserves to die like that. Don't they? Peter laughed bitterly. What about people who destroy lives with their whispers and their prying? What about— That's enough, Peter, Morrison interrupted sharply. This isn't the time or place. The young man glared at the solicitor. Oh, you'd know all about the proper time and place, wouldn't you, Morrison? Just like you knew all about Eleanor's legal inquiries. I wonder what else you know that you're not telling. With that parting shot, he stormed out, leaving behind a tea shop full of troubled faces and unspoken questions. Well, Mrs. Clement finally broke the silence. What on earth was that about? Peter's been going through a difficult time, Clarissa said weakly. The stress of his final year at university and then, well, he and Eleanor did have a bit of a row last month about the greenhouse. She claimed some of his plants were growing over her wall. Was all Miss Marple said. But her needles clicked thoughtfully. A row about plants seemed hardly sufficient to inspire such venom, and there had been something in the young man's eyes when he spoke. Not just anger, but fear. I should go after him, Clarissa sighed, rising. Make sure he doesn't do anything foolish. I'll come with you, Morrison offered quickly. After they left, the tea shop erupted in excited speculation. Everyone, it seemed, had a theory about what might have driven someone to poison Eleanor Whitfield. Her sharp tongue was legendary, as was her habit of collecting information, as she called it. She knew things, Mrs. Weatherby said darkly. Things about people, things they'd rather keep hidden. What sort of things? Asked Mrs. Clement eagerly. Well, Mrs. Weatherby glanced around and lowered her voice. She once hinted to me that she knew why the Palmers left the village so suddenly 5 years ago, and there was that business with the church funds that never quite added up. Miss Marple listened to the gossip swirling around her, sorting fact from speculation, noting what was said and, more importantly, what was left unsaid. Several times she noticed, when someone began to speak of specific incidents, they would catch themselves and fall silent, as if remembering that the dead woman's talent for collecting information might have touched their own lives. It was Nurse Fowler who finally voiced what they were all thinking. If Eleanor was poisoned because of something she knew, she said slowly, then the question is, what secret was worth killing for? And perhaps more importantly, Miss Marple added gently, setting down her knitting, why was that secret symbolized by a baby's bootie? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications. Around the tea shop, faces grew thoughtful, worried, even afraid, for in a village where everyone knew everyone else's business, the suggestion that there might be secrets, dangerous secrets, still hidden was deeply unsettling. As Miss Marple gathered her things to leave, she overheard Mrs. Clement whisper to Mrs. Weatherby, "Do you remember, about 25 years ago, there was talk about a girl who went away suddenly, something about a baby." "Shh," Mrs. Weatherby hissed. "Not here, not now." Miss Marple filed this fragment away with all the others. Like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, she thought, as she stepped out into the autumn sunshine, and somewhere among all these pieces lay the answer to who had poisoned Eleanor Whitfield, and why. The question was, would she be able to put them together before the murderer struck again? Inspector Drummond of the Much Bentham Constabulary was a methodical man who believed in procedure, evidence, and the fundamental principle that the simplest explanation was usually the correct one. As he sat in the drawing room at Thornfield House the following afternoon, reviewing his notes with Sergeant Collins, he felt confident that the Whitfield case would prove straightforward enough. Potassium cyanide, he read from the preliminary autopsy report, administered in the tea. Death would have occurred within 5 to 10 minutes. Quick work, Collins observed. Someone wanted her dead badly enough not to care about subtlety. Indeed, Drummond tapped his pencil against his notebook. Now let's review what we know. The victim entered the morning room at approximately 3:45 p.m., claiming fatigue. The housemaid Jenny Watts brought her tea at 3:50 p.m. The body was discovered at 4:10 p.m. 20-minute window, Collins said. Narrow, but sufficient. The tea things were prepared in the kitchen by Mrs. Jennings and Jenny. However, Drummond referred to his notes, there was considerable coming and going. Any number of people could have slipped into the kitchen or intercepted the tray. A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Jennings appeared, escorting an elderly lady in a lavender dress. "Miss Marple to see you, Inspector," the housekeeper announced. "She says she may have some information relevant to your investigation." Drummond suppressed a sigh. Village busybodies were an occupational hazard, but they had to be handled with tact. Of course, do come in, Miss Marple. Miss Marple settled herself comfortably, producing her inevitable knitting from her bag. So kind of you to see me, Inspector. I do hope I'm not interrupting your important work. Not at all, Drummond lied politely. You were present at the garden party, I understand? Oh yes, such a lovely afternoon, until, well, she shook her head sadly. Poor Eleanor, she could be trying at times, but she didn't deserve such an end. Did you know Miss Whitfield well? We'd been acquainted for many years. Eleanor was what you might call a fixture in the village. Very observant. So I've heard. Drummond leaned forward slightly. You said you had information? Well, I'm not sure if it's important, Miss Marple began diffidently, but I couldn't help noticing something about the bootie. The bootie? Drummond's interest sharpened. The baby's bootie found beside the body was one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Yes. You see, I do a great deal of knitting myself, and I recognize the pattern. It's quite distinctive, called Maiden's Wish. Very popular about 25 or 30 years ago, but rarely used now. The wool, too, that particular shade of yellow, hasn't been available for decades. Drummond exchanged glances with Collins. You're saying the bootie is old? Oh yes, quite old, and beautifully preserved. Someone had kept it very carefully. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. It made me think, you see, why would someone keep a single baby's bootie for so many years? Usually, such things are kept in pairs, as mementos. Perhaps the other was lost, Collins suggested. Perhaps, Miss Marple agreed, or perhaps it was deliberately separated. In my experience, when someone keeps half of a pair, it's often because the other half has significance elsewhere. Drummond made a note. Interesting? Anything else? Well, Miss Marple hesitated. I did wonder about the scratches Nurse Fowler mentioned on Eleanor's wrists. You see, they reminded me of something. My nephew's wife has a cat, a Persian, very beautiful but quite temperamental. When it's frightened, it scratches in just that way. 3 parallel marks, quite deep. Are you suggesting Miss Whitfield was attacked by a cat? Drummond tried to keep the skepticism from his voice. Oh no, Inspector. I'm merely observing that frightened creatures, human or animal, often leave similar marks when they're trying to escape, or when they're trying to hold on to something. Before Drummond could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway. Voices raised in argument, one of them unmistakably that of Peter Ashford. I don't care what she said. I won't have you spreading lies about me. The door burst open, and Peter stormed in, followed by a flustered-looking Helena Ashford and Dr. Pemberton. Inspector, Helena began apologetically. I'm so sorry for the interruption, but Peter insisted. Someone's been telling you I threatened Eleanor, Peter interrupted, his face flushed with anger. Well, it's not true. I never threatened her. Nobody said you threatened her, Mr. Ashford, Drummond said calmly. However, several witnesses have mentioned an altercation between you and the victim last month. About the greenhouse wall. Some vines had grown over. It was nothing. And now people are saying, he broke off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. What are people saying? Drummond asked quietly. Peter glanced at his aunt, then at Dr. Pemberton, who placed a restraining hand on the young man's shoulder. Perhaps we should discuss this more calmly, the doctor suggested. Peter's been under considerable strain with his studies. Don't patronize me. Peter shook off the doctor's hand. I know what you all think. Poor unstable Peter, always causing trouble. Well, I didn't kill her, no matter what she knew. What did she know? Drummond asked sharply. Peter's face went white. Nothing. I meant nothing. I think, Helena said firmly, that Peter needs to rest. This has all been too much for him. Doctor, perhaps you could... Of course. Dr. Pemberton took Peter's arm more firmly this time. Come along, young man. Let's get you something to calm your nerves. As they left, Helena turned to the inspector with an apologetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You must forgive my nephew. He's highly strung, and all this business has upset him terribly. He was genuinely fond of Eleanor, despite their silly quarrel. I see, Drummond said neutrally. Mrs. Ashford, I need to ask you about the tea arrangements. Who had access to the kitchen during the party? Helena sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 55 years. Everyone, I suppose. It was so busy, people coming and going, the caterers, the servants, guests fetching things. I tried to maintain some order, but... Did you notice anyone acting unusually? Anyone who shouldn't have been in the kitchen? No, Wait, Helena frowned. There was something, about an hour before Eleanor. Before it happened, I saw Nurse Fowler coming out of the kitchen. She seemed flustered, and when I asked if everything was all right, she said she'd been looking for bicarbonate of soda. Someone had complained of indigestion. Who complained? She didn't say, and I didn't think to ask. There was so much to do. Helena's voice trailed off. Miss Marple, who had been quietly knitting throughout this exchange, looked up. How very thoughtful of Nurse Fowler. She's always so conscientious about people's health. I remember when my nephew had dyspepsia, she recommended the most effective remedy. Drummond made another note. The nurse would need to be questioned more thoroughly. Mrs. Ashford, can you think of any reason someone would want to harm Miss Whitfield? Helena was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor was complicated. She had a talent for discovering things people would rather keep private. Not maliciously, you understand. She was simply curious about everyone and everything. Blackmail, Colin suggested. Oh no. Helena looked shocked. Eleanor would never. That is, she might hint that she knew things, but she'd never demand money or anything like that. It was more that she enjoyed feeling important, being the one who knew all the village secrets. What kind of secrets? Drummond pressed. Helena shifted uncomfortably. I really couldn't say. Eleanor never confided in me. We were neighbors, not intimates. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Yet she chose to rest in your morning room when she felt unwell. She must have felt comfortable in your home. Well, yes, I suppose. Helena seemed flustered by this observation. Mrs. Ashford, Drummond said, what can you tell me about the baby's bootie found with the body? The color drained from Helena's face. I have no idea. I've never seen it before. Are you certain? Drummond watched her carefully. It's quite distinctive, I'm told. Yellow wool, an unusual pattern. Maiden's wish, Miss Marple supplied helpfully. Very popular when your daughter Clarissa would have been born, I believe. Helena stood abruptly. I'm sorry, Inspector, but I'm feeling rather unwell myself. If you have no further questions... Just one more, Drummond said. Where is your daughter now? Clarissa? She went into the village with James Morrison. Something about papers to sign at his office. Helena's voice was steady again, but her hands trembled slightly. After Helena left, Drummond turned to Miss Marple. You seem to have upset Mrs. Ashford with your observation about the bootie pattern. Did I? Miss Marple looked genuinely surprised. How odd. I was merely trying to establish a time frame. You see, Inspector, in my experience, baby clothes are usually kept for sentimental reasons, either by mothers or by those who wish to be mothers. You think the bootie belonged to Mrs. Ashford? I couldn't say. But it is interesting, isn't it, that Clarissa left for London rather suddenly 5 years ago, and that she's returned just as suddenly, and that Eleanor Whitfield had been researching parish records and birth certificates. Drummond studied the elderly lady with new respect. You're suggesting a connection. I'm merely observing, Inspector. After all, at my age, one has little to do but observe. She smiled sweetly. Though I must say it does seem curious that a woman known for discovering secrets should die with a baby's bootie beside her, almost as if someone wanted to reveal a secret rather than hide one. Or muddy the waters, Collins suggested. That too is possible, Miss Marple agreed, though in my experience, people under stress rarely think so cleverly. They act on emotion, not calculation, and placing that bootie would have required forethought. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jenny, the housemaid, peered in nervously. Sorry to disturb, sir, but there's a telephone call for you. From the station. They say it's urgent. Drummond excused himself, leaving Collins with Miss Marple. The sergeant, less practiced in handling elderly ladies, shifted uncomfortably under her mild gaze. Such a pleasant young man, Miss Marple observed. You must see many distressing things in your line of work. Fair bit, Collins admitted. Though poisoning's not common, usually it's domestics gone wrong or pub fights. Yes, poison is a more deliberate choice, isn't it? It requires planning, preparation, not like striking out in anger. She paused in her knitting. though I do wonder about those scratches. They suggest some sort of struggle, don't they?" Before Collins could answer, Drummond returned, his face grim. "I'm afraid I have to cut this short," he announced. "There's been a development. The chemist in Little Bentham has reported a break-in at his shop last night. Several poisons are missing, including potassium cyanide." "After the murder?" Collins asked, surprised. "Exactly, which means either our murderer is planning another crime, or someone is trying to cover their tracks by making it look like the poison was stolen rather than purchased legitimately." Miss Marple gathered her knitting. "How very disturbing. I do hope you'll take precautions, Inspector, if the murderer is becoming desperate." "We'll handle it, Miss Marple," Drummond assured her. "Thank you for your observations about the booty. Most helpful." As Miss Marple made her way out, she paused at the door. "Inspector, one more small thing. You might want to ask Dr. Pemberton about his medical supplies. Potassium cyanide has legitimate medical uses, I believe, and he was so very quick to identify the symptoms of poisoning at the scene." With that quietly devastating observation, she departed, leaving Drummond and Collins to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the case. "Think she's onto something, sir?" Collins asked. Drummond stared at his notes, where the list of suspects seemed to grow longer by the minute. "I think," he said slowly, "that Miss Marple sees more than she lets on, and I think we need to dig deeper into exactly what Eleanor Whitfield was investigating before she died." Outside, Miss Marple made her way slowly down the drive of Thornfield House, her mind busy with what she had learned. The scratches on Eleanor's wrists troubled her more than she had let on to the inspector. They spoke of desperation, of a final struggle. But what had Eleanor been trying to hold on to? Or whom? The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. Somewhere among these familiar houses and gardens, a murderer walked free. And until the secret of the yellow booty was revealed, Miss Marple feared they would strike again. The saloon bar of the Green Dragon was unusually crowded for a Thursday evening. Word had spread about the break-in at the chemist's shop, and the village had gathered to discuss this latest development in hushed, excited tones. Miss Marple sat in a corner with her friend Mrs. Bantry, nursing a small glass of sherry and listening to the conversations swirling around them. It was remarkable, she reflected, how much people revealed when they thought no one important was listening. "Mark my words," declared Tom Hopwood, the local builder. "It's someone from outside. No one from the village would poison old Eleanor." "Wouldn't they?" challenged Fred Marks, who ran the garage. "She knew enough secrets to fill a book. Remember when she hinted about knowing who'd been stealing from the church collection?" "That was never proved," Reverend Holt interjected mildly from his seat near the fire. His wife Grace sat beside him, her face drawn with worry. "Wasn't it?" Fred's tone was suggestive. "Funny how the theft stopped right after she had her little chat with certain parties." An uncomfortable silence fell. Miss Marple noticed several people shifting uneasily, including James Morrison, who had just entered with Clarissa Ashford. "Evening all," Morrison said with forced cheer. "Clarissa and I thought we'd stop in for a quick drink." "How are you holding up, dear?" Mrs. Bantry asked Clarissa kindly. "As well as can be expected," Clarissa replied, though Miss Marple noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as Morrison helped her into a chair. "Mother's taking it very hard. She and Eleanor went back such a long way. 30 years as neighbors," someone murmured. "More than that," said Millicent Price, who had abandoned her usual evening postal duties to join the gathering. "Helena and Eleanor knew each other before Helena married Richard Ashford. They were at school together, weren't they?" "St. Catherine's," Grace Holt confirmed. "Eleanor used to speak of their school days sometimes." "Did she?" Morrison seemed particularly interested in this. "What did she say?" Grace hesitated. "Oh, just reminiscences. Though," she glanced at her husband uncertainly. "Go on, my dear," the Reverend encouraged. "Well, she did mention once that Helena had been quite different as a girl, more adventurous. Said she'd changed completely after she married." "Marriage changes people," Clarissa said sharply. "It's natural." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Bantry soothed, though Eleanor did love to dramatize things. The pub door opened again, admitting Dr. Pemberton and Nurse Fowler. They seemed to be in the middle of an intense discussion, which they quickly curtailed upon seeing the assembled company. "Good evening," the doctor said stiffly. "Margaret and I were just discussing the medical supplies inventory. Given the break-in at Hartwell's chemist, I thought we should check our own stocks. Very wise, Morrison said. Is anything missing? Not from my surgery, Pemberton replied. Margaret? The nurse shook her head. Everything's accounted for, though I must say, the idea of someone stealing poisons. She shuddered. Inspector Drummond seems to think it might be connected to Eleanor's death, Fred Marks said, watching the newcomers closely. Someone covering their tracks, he reckons. Or preparing for another murder, Tom Hopwood added dramatically. Don't be ridiculous, Pemberton snapped. One death doesn't mean we have a serial killer on our hands. Doesn't it? Asked a cold voice from the doorway. Peter Ashford stood there, his face flushed as if he'd been drinking already. Maybe someone's decided to clean house, get rid of all the village busybodies who can't mind their own business. Peter, Clarissa began warningly. What? It's what everyone's thinking, isn't it? He made his way unsteadily to the bar. Eleanor's gone, and good riddance. Who's next? Millicent here, with her postal snooping. Or maybe our good Reverend, with his pastoral visits that always seem to coincide with family crises. That's enough, Morrison said firmly, rising from his seat. Peter turned on him with a sneer. Oh, defending your lady love, Morrison? How gallant. Tell me, does Clarissa know about your visits to Eleanor last week? 3 times in 5 days must have been fascinating legal discussions. The solicitor's face darkened. Miss Whitfield was my client. Our meetings were entirely professional. Were they? Peter laughed unpleasantly. Then why did I see you leaving by the back gate, looking like you'd seen a ghost? You're drunk, Pemberton diagnosed. Let me take you home. I'm not drunk enough, Peter retorted, but he allowed the doctor to guide him toward the door. As they passed Miss Marple's table, she heard him mutter, should have burned those papers when I had the chance. After they left, conversation exploded around the pub. Morrison sank back into his chair, his face pale. Is it true, James? Clarissa asked quietly. Were you visiting Eleanor? She was updating her will, Morrison said stiffly. I can't discuss the details. Client confidentiality, but there was nothing untoward about it. 3 times in 5 days for a will. Millicent's tone was skeptical. Morrison's jaw tightened. She kept changing her mind about the provisions. Eleanor was particular about details. Miss Marple caught Mrs. Bantry's eye and made a small gesture toward the door. The 2 elderly ladies made their excuses and stepped out into the cool evening air. Well, Mrs. Bantry exclaimed once they were out of earshot. That was illuminating. James Morrison visiting Eleanor secretly, Peter knowing about burned papers. What do you make of it all, Jane? Miss Marple was quiet for a moment, ordering her thoughts. I think, she said slowly, that we're seeing the effects of Eleanor's talent for collecting information. Several people in that pub tonight were afraid, but not all of the same thing. What do you mean? Did you notice how Nurse Fowler kept touching her medical bag, as if reassuring herself it was there, and how the Reverend's wife stopped herself from saying something about Helena's past, and Mr. Morrison's reaction when Peter mentioned papers? You think they all have secrets, Eleanor? Knew? I think Eleanor knew many things. The question is, which secret was worth killing for? Miss Marple paused. And why announce it with a baby's booty? They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, before Mrs. Bantry spoke again. Jane, do you remember about 25 years ago there was some scandal involving a girl from the village? I was away visiting my sister at the time, but when I came back there was an atmosphere. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. The Delaney girl. Rose, I believe her name was. She worked as a housemaid somewhere in the village, and left quite suddenly. There were whispers about a baby, but nothing was ever confirmed. That's it. Rose Delaney. Pretty girl, auburn hair. Whatever became of her? No one knows. She simply vanished one day. Her mother received a letter saying she'd found work in London, and that was that. Auburn hair, Mrs. Bantry mused. You know, Clarissa has auburn hair. Rather unusual in these parts. Many people have auburn hair, Miss Marple said mildly. Though it is interesting that Clarissa left for London 5 years ago, just as suddenly as Rose Delaney did 25 years ago. They had reached the corner where their paths diverged. Mrs. Bantry turned to her friend with a troubled expression. Jane, you don't think Helena's reaction to the booty? I think, Miss Marple said carefully, that tomorrow I shall pay a visit to the church. Reverend Holt mentioned that Eleanor had been researching parish records. It might be interesting to see what she was looking for. Shall I come with you? That's kind of you, but I think I'll go alone. Less conspicuous that way. Miss Marple smiled. After all, what could be more natural than an elderly lady visiting the church? As they parted ways, Miss Marple noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the post office. For a moment she thought it might be Peter Ashford, but as the figure moved into the light of a street lamp, she recognized Dr. Pemberton. He seemed to be watching someone farther down the street, following her gaze. Miss Marple saw Nurse Fowler hurrying toward her cottage, her medical bag clutched tightly in her hand. Curiouser and curiouser, Miss Marple thought, using one of her nephew's favorite expressions. The doctor watching the nurse, the solicitor with his secret visits, the young man who spoke of burned papers, and over it all, the shadow of a 25-year-old scandal. She made her way home slowly, her mind working through the possibilities. In her experience, family secrets were the most dangerous kind. They festered in silence, growing more poisonous with each passing year, until finally someone like Eleanor Whitfield threatened to expose them. As she reached her cottage gate, Miss Marple made a mental note to examine the parish records for births, deaths, and marriages from 25 years ago. She had a feeling that somewhere in those dusty registers lay the key to understanding why Eleanor Whitfield had died with a baby's bootie beside her. The moon was rising, casting silver light over the sleeping village, but Miss Marple knew that beneath the peaceful surface, secrets stirred uneasily. The murderer was out there, perhaps planning their next move. She double-checked her door locks before retiring, something she rarely bothered with. For the first time in many years, Miss Marple felt that the village might not be as safe as it appeared. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn stone floor. Miss Marple sat in the vestry with Reverend Holt, surrounded by leather-bound parish registers that smelled of age and dust. Eleanor spent hours with these, the Reverend said, gesturing at the stack of books, particularly the registers from 1998 to 2000. She said she was researching local history. But you suspected otherwise, Miss Marple prompted gently. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor had a way of asking questions that seemed innocent but weren't. She kept coming back to certain pages, making notes. When I asked if I could help, she became quite secretive. May I see the registers she was most interested in? Of course. He pulled out 3 volumes. She concentrated on these. I must admit, after she died, I looked through them myself, trying to understand what she'd been searching for. And did you find anything? Nothing that seemed significant. Births, deaths, marriages, baptisms, the usual entries. Miss Marple opened the first register, dated 9. Her finger traced down the entries, noting the familiar names of village families. Then she turned to 1999, paying particular attention to the autumn months. Reverend, she said slowly, I noticed there's a page missing here. Between September and October 9. The Reverend leaned forward, alarmed. Missing? But that's impossible. These registers are complete. He examined the binding closely. Good heavens, you're right. It's been very carefully done, but someone has removed a page. Recently? I couldn't say. The edges are clean, not torn. Someone used a razor or very sharp knife. His face was troubled. Who would vandalize church records? Someone who didn't want certain information found. Miss Marple murmured. Tell me, who else has access to these registers? Well, myself, of course. My wife helps with the filing. The church wardens have keys, and Eleanor borrowed the vestry key several times. Said it was easier to research when I wasn't here to disturb her. I see. Miss Marple turned to the register for 2000. What about deaths? Any unusual entries? The Reverend consulted the index. Let me see. February 2000. Here's something odd. Baby Delaney, infant daughter of Rose Delaney, died February 15th, aged 2 days. Private burial. Miss Marple's needles stilled. Rose Delaney had a baby? But I thought she left for London in the autumn of 1999. Apparently not. The Reverend looked puzzled. Though this is strange. I wasn't the vicar then. Reverend Mitchell was. But there's no record of the birth in our registers. And see here, the burial entry is different from the others. Different ink, slightly different handwriting, as if it were added later. How much later? I couldn't say without proper analysis. But Jane, if Rose Delaney had a baby here in the village, Where was she? And why didn't anyone know about it? Miss Marple studied the entry carefully. Next to it, in pencil so faint it was barely visible, someone had written a single word, twin. Good gracious, she breathed. Reverend, look at this. He squinted at the pencil notation. Twin. But there's no record of a second baby. No official record, Miss Marple corrected. But what if there were twins, and only one death was recorded? What happened to the other baby? Before the Reverend could answer, the vestry door opened, and Grace Holt peered in. Timothy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Inspector Drummond is here. He wants to ask you about the missing poisons from the chemist's shop. Of course. Miss Marple, would you excuse me? Certainly. Might I continue looking through the registers? I promise to be very careful. The Reverend hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Grace can stay with you, if you don't mind, my dear. After he left, Grace Holt sat down across from Miss Marple with a sigh. This whole business has Timothy so upset. First Eleanor's death, now these missing poisons. He barely slept last night. It must be very trying, Miss Marple sympathized. I suppose you knew Eleanor well, helping with church affairs. Grace's expression tightened slightly. We were acquainted. Eleanor was very involved in parish matters. Yes, she seems to have been interested in many things, including old parish records. She was obsessed with them lately, Grace admitted, always asking questions about former parishioners, especially anyone who left the village suddenly. Like Rose Delaney? Grace started. You know about Rose? Only that she left the village about 25 years ago. There were rumors. There are always rumors in villages, Grace said carefully. Rose was a nice girl, worked hard. Then one day she was gone. Where did she work? Grace hesitated just a fraction too long. Here and there, domestic service. Miss Marple's keen eyes noticed the evasion. I see, and no one kept in touch with her. Her mother received a few letters, then nothing. She died about 10 years ago. Mrs. Delaney, I mean, took Rose's whereabouts to her grave. How sad. Miss Marple returned to the register. I found an entry here for a baby Delaney, died in infancy, but there's no birth record. Grace went very pale. That must be a mistake. Must it? This pencil notation suggests there might have been twins. I wouldn't know anything about that, Grace said quickly. I wasn't living in the village then. That was a lie. Miss Marple knew. Grace Holt had been born and raised in the village, only leaving briefly for teacher training college. But she merely said, of course, how silly of me. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Grace suddenly burst out. Miss Marple, may I ask you something in confidence? Certainly, my dear. Do you think Eleanor's death really was about something that happened 25 years ago? It seems so long ago, and whoever was involved then, surely it can't matter now. In my experience, Miss Marple said gently, old secrets have a way of mattering very much, especially when they concern children. A mother's love or guilt doesn't fade with time. Grace's hands twisted in her lap. But if someone hypothetically had helped a girl in trouble years ago, tried to do the right thing, that wouldn't be wrong, would it? That would depend on what help was given, and why. Sometimes what seems like kindness can cause great harm. Before Grace could respond, footsteps echoed in the church. Dr. Pemberton appeared in the vestry doorway, his medical bag in hand. Mrs. Holt, Miss Marple, I'm looking for the Reverend. He's with Inspector Drummond, Grace said, composing herself quickly. Is someone ill? No. I wanted to speak with him about increasing security for the medical supplies. After the chemist shop break-in, he noticed the open registers, doing historical research. Eleanor Whitfield was researching these records before she died, Miss Marple explained. We were trying to understand what interested her. The doctor's expression grew guarded. Eleanor was always poking into the past. Some things are better left buried. Like baby Delaney, Miss Marple asked mildly. Pemberton went very still. What do you know about that? Only what's written here. An infant death in February 2000, no birth record, and a penciled notation suggesting twins. Nonsense, Pemberton said sharply. I was practicing here then. There were no twins. You attended the birth. I know. The baby was born elsewhere. I only dealt with the aftermath. The death, you mean? Yes. He seemed to realize he'd said too much. If you'll excuse me, I need to find the Reverend." After he left, Miss Marple turned to Grace Holt. "How interesting that Dr. Pemberton remembers a case from 25 years ago so clearly." Grace stood abruptly. "I should go. Timothy will wonder where I am." "Of course. But Mrs. Holt, one more question. The booty found with Eleanor's body was yellow wool knitted in the Maiden's Wish pattern. Did you ever knit such things?" "I? Many people knitted that pattern." "Yes, but you're known for your beautiful handiwork. And yellow is such an unusual choice for baby clothes. Most people choose pink or blue, or white if they don't know the baby's sex. Yellow suggests someone who was knitting before the birth, someone who either didn't know or didn't want to reveal whether they expected a boy or girl." Grace's face crumpled. "I can't, please, Miss Marple. Don't ask me about this." "My dear, I think you need to tell someone. Whatever secret you've been carrying, it's already cost one life. Do you want another death on your conscience?" "You don't understand," Grace whispered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We were trying to protect everyone. The girl, the baby, the family's reputation. We." But Grace shook her head and fled, leaving Miss Marple alone with the registers and her growing certainty that baby Delaney, or babies, lay at the heart of Eleanor Whitfield's murder. She carefully copied the relevant entries in her notebook, including the mysterious penciled notation. As she prepared to leave, something else caught her eye, a small water stain on the page opposite the death entry, as if someone had been crying while writing. Or perhaps, she thought, while adding an entry that should have been there all along. The church bells chimed noon as Miss Marple made her way out into the sunshine. She needed to think, to piece together what she'd learned. Rose Delaney had given birth, possibly to twins, in early February 2000. One baby had died and was buried quietly. But what of the other child, if indeed there had been twins? And more importantly, who in the village had a 25-year-old secret worth killing to protect? As she walked past the churchyard, Miss Marple noticed a small section near the back wall, overgrown with ivy. The baby graves, almost forgotten now. She made a mental note to return later with flowers. Whatever secrets lay buried there, the innocent deserved to be remembered. Behind her, hidden in the shadow of the church doorway, someone watched her leave with troubled eyes. The game was becoming dangerous now, the carefully constructed lies of decades threatening to unravel. But there was still time to prevent the truth from coming out. The stolen poisons would provide options, and if necessary, there were other ways to ensure silence. After all, they'd kept the secret this long. A few more deaths would be a small price to pay to protect what mattered most. The afternoon tea at the vicarage was traditionally a genteel affair, but on this particular Saturday, the atmosphere crackled with unspoken tensions. Miss Marple sat with her customary knitting, observing the assembled company with keen interest. Helena Ashford presided over the silver tea service, with rigid composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured. Clarissa sat beside James Morrison on the sofa, their shoulders not quite touching. Dr. Pemberton occupied an armchair near the window, while Nurse Fowler perched uncomfortably on a straight-backed chair, as if ready to flee at any moment. "Such a lovely spread, Grace," Helena said with forced brightness. "Your Victoria sponge is always perfection." Grace Holt managed a wan smile. "Thank you. Though I must confess, I had little appetite for baking. These past few days have been difficult for everyone." Reverend Holt finished gently, "But we must carry on. Eleanor would have wanted that." "Would she?" Peter Ashford's voice came from the doorway. He lounged against the frame, his eyes glittering with something that might have been malice or fever. "I think Eleanor would have enjoyed all this drama immensely. All her chickens coming home to roost." "Peter." Helena's voice held a warning. "This is hardly the time." "When is the time, Aunt Helena?" "When we're all safely dead." He sauntered into the room, ignoring the disapproving looks. "Or are we waiting for Inspector Drummond to arrest someone? Anyone, just to make this all go away?" "No one wants that," Morrison said firmly. "We all want the truth." "Do we?" Peter's laugh was harsh. "Then why is everyone lying?" A shocked silence fell. Miss Marple's needles continued their steady rhythm, but her attention was wholly focused on the group. "I don't know what you mean," Pemberton said stiffly. "Don't you? Then let me enlighten everyone." Peter's smile was unpleasant. "Our good doctor here has been stealing medical supplies for months. Small amounts, carefully documented as wastage. Isn't that right, Doctor? Pemberton's face went white. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation if it's true. I saw the records when I was helping with the surgery inventory last month. Very clever, really. A vial here, a packet there. Nothing that would be missed unless someone was looking closely. If you suspected wrongdoing, why didn't you report it? Morrison demanded. Because I'm not a snitch, Peter said. Unlike Eleanor, who couldn't wait to share every sordid detail she uncovered. She knew about the thefts, didn't she, Doctor? Is that why she had to die? How dare you? Pemberton rose from his chair, fists clenched. Gentlemen, please. Reverend Holt intervened. This is a house of peace. Peace built on lies, Peter retorted. Ask Nurse Fowler about her midnight visits to Thornfield House. Go on, Margaret. Tell them why you've been sneaking into our greenhouse at night. All eyes turned to the nurse, who had gone pale as parchment. I can explain. Can you? Helena's voice was ice cold. Because I'd very much like to know why you've been trespassing on our property. Nurse Fowler's hands twisted in her lap. It wasn't what you think. I was looking for something. What? Morrison asked quietly. Foxglove, she whispered. Digitalis. Peter's been growing it in the greenhouse, and I needed some for a patient. You needed poison, Grace Holt gasped. It's medicine in the right doses, Fowler protested. Mrs. Crawford's heart condition, the regular medication wasn't working, and I remembered that Peter had cultivated a particularly potent strain. So you stole it? Helena's voice rose. From our greenhouse? I was going to ask. But Peter, she glanced at the young man. You weren't exactly approachable, and Mrs. Crawford was desperate. Touching, Peter drawled. A regular Florence Nightingale. But that's not all you were after, was it? Tell them about the letters. Miss Marple looked up sharply. Letters. Nurse Fowler's face crumpled. Eleanor had letters. Old ones. She showed them to me last month. Said she'd found them hidden in a book at a church jumble sale. Letters from Rose Delaney. The room went very still. Helena's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. What letters? Clarissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Love letters, Fowler said miserably. To someone in the village. Someone who promised to take care of her and the baby. Only they were signed with initials, not a name. What initials? Morrison pressed. R.A., Fowler replied. Eleanor was trying to work out who R.A. was. She thought if she could identify them, she'd understand what really happened to Rose and her baby. Babies, Miss Marple corrected gently. There were twins, weren't there? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Grace Holt spoke, her voice trembling. God forgive me. Yes, there were twins. Grace, her husband looked at her in shock. I can't carry this anymore, Timothy. It's destroying us all. She turned to Miss Marple. You already know, don't you? Somehow you've worked it out. I've guessed some of it, Miss Marple admitted. But perhaps you should tell us what really happened. Grace took a shuddering breath. Rose Delaney came to me in December 19. She was pregnant, desperate, with nowhere to turn. The father had abandoned her, and she couldn't face the shame. I agreed to help. When? How? Morrison asked gently. I arranged for her to stay at a cottage outside the village. When she went into labor, I called Dr. Pemberton, but there were complications. Twins. When we expected one baby, the first was born healthy, but the second, she broke off, tears streaming down her face. The second was stillborn, Pemberton said heavily. Or so we thought. There was no heartbeat, no breathing. I tried everything, but, Miss Marple prompted. But then the baby gasped, just once. It was probably just a reflex. But Rose became hysterical. She insisted the baby was alive, that we had to save it. In the chaos, with Rose hemorrhaging and the healthy twin crying, he rubbed his face. I made a decision. I told her the second baby couldn't be saved. Dear God, Clarissa breathed. You lied to her. I thought I was being kind, Pemberton protested. The baby was severely compromised. Even if it survived, it would never have a normal life. And Rose was so young, already overwhelmed with one healthy baby. So you took the second twin, Miss Marple said quietly. What did you do with it? Another silence fell. Then Helena Ashford spoke. her voice hollow. He brought the baby to me. All eyes turned to her. Clarissa stared at her mother in horror. "Mother, what are you saying?" "I'd had another miscarriage," Helena continued, as if in a trance. "My fifth. Richard was threatening to divorce me if I couldn't give him a child. I was desperate, and here was this baby, unwanted, supposedly dying." "You took Rose Delaney's baby?" Clarissa's voice was rising. "You stole a baby?" "I saved a baby," Helena shot back. "That child would have died without proper care. I gave it everything. Love, comfort, the best medical attention money could buy." "It," Miss Marple said softly. "You keep saying it. But the baby had a name, didn't it? A gender." Helena's composure finally cracked. "Her. The baby was a girl. We named her Clarissa." The room erupted. Clarissa jumped to her feet, Morrison reaching for her as she swayed. No, that's not possible. You're my mother. You've always been my mother." "I am your mother," Helena said desperately, "in every way that matters. I raised you, loved you. You lied to me. My whole life has been a lie." Clarissa turned wild eyes on the assembly. "Did you all know? Have you all been laughing at me behind my back?" "No one knew," Grace said quickly. "Only Dr. Pemberton, Helena, and myself. We never told anyone, not even Richard." "R.A., Miss Marple murmured. "Richard Ashford. He was Rose's lover, wasn't he?" Helena nodded miserably. "She was working as our housemaid. Richard seduced her, then panicked when she became pregnant. He gave her money to go away, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. She loved him, poor girl." "So you took his bastard and raised her as your own," Peter said with bitter satisfaction. "How wonderfully twisted. Did he ever suspect?" "Never. He was away on business when everything happened. I padded my clothes, pretended to be pregnant, then presented him with our daughter when he returned. He was so pleased to finally have a child, he never questioned it." "And the other twin?" Morrison asked. "The healthy one?" "Adopted," Grace said. "I arranged it through a private agency in London. A good family, unable to have children of their own. Rose agreed to it. She was broken after losing the second baby or thinking she had. She signed the papers and left for London herself. I don't know what became of her after that." "Eleanor knew," Nurse Fowler said suddenly. "That's what the letters proved. Rose didn't disappear. She came back years later, looking for her children, both of them. Somehow she'd learned the truth about the second twin." "When?" Miss Marple asked sharply. 5 years ago, Fowler replied, just before Clarissa left for London. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Clarissa sank back onto the sofa, her face white. The woman at the railway station, auburn hair, like mine. She kept staring at me, tried to speak to me. I thought she was mad. "That was probably Rose," Miss Marple said gently. "Your birth mother." "But why didn't she say anything?" Clarissa cried. "Why didn't she tell me the truth?" "Because Eleanor stopped her," Helena said bitterly. "She intercepted Rose, told her that revealing the truth would destroy lives, that Clarissa was happy, successful, with a family who loved her. She convinced Rose to leave without making contact." "But Rose left something behind," Miss Marple said. "A yellow bootie, one of a pair she'd knitted for her twins." "Eleanor kept it," Nurse Fowler confirmed. "She showed it to me with the letters, said it was proof of the whole story." "And now Eleanor's dead," Morrison said grimly, "poisoned, with that same bootie beside her. Someone wanted the truth to come out. Or wanted to torment the killer with their own guilty secret," Miss Marple suggested. "The question is, who had access to that bootie? Who knew where Eleanor kept it?" "I need air," Clarissa said suddenly, rising unsteadily. I can't process this." She fled the room, Morrison close behind her. The others sat in stunned silence, the weight of revealed secrets pressing down on them like a physical force. "So," Peter said finally, with grim satisfaction, "now we know why Eleanor had to die. The question is, which one of you killed her to keep this secret buried?" "That's enough," Reverend Holt said firmly. "I think we should call Inspector Drummond. These revelations need to be shared with the police." "No." Helena's voice was sharp with panic. "Please, not yet. Let me talk to Clarissa first. Let me explain." "Explain what?" Grace asked tiredly. "How we stole a woman's child. How we built decades of lies. Timothy's right. It's time for the truth. The truth, Miss Marple said quietly, is that someone in this room is a murderer, and I fear they're not finished yet. As if to underscore her words, a scream pierced the air from the garden. They rushed to the windows to see Clarissa collapsed on the lawn, Morrison kneeling beside her, shouting for help. "She's been poisoned," he cried. "Someone help her." Dr. Pemberton grabbed his medical bag and ran for the door, the others following. But Miss Marple remained by the window, her eyes scanning the scene with professional detachment. There, caught on a rose bush near where Clarissa had fallen, was a small piece of yellow wool, as if someone had passed by in haste, leaving behind a telltale thread from a carefully preserved baby's bootie. The second act of the tragedy had begun. The waiting room at the cottage hospital was filled with tense, exhausted faces. Clarissa had been rushed into emergency treatment, Dr. Pemberton working alongside the hospital staff to save her life. Inspector Drummond had arrived within the hour, transforming the small hospital into a crime scene. Miss Marple sat quietly in a corner, her knitting needles moving automatically as she observed the assembled group. Helena Ashford had aged 10 years in as many minutes, her carefully maintained composure shattered. James Morrison paced relentlessly, while Peter Ashford sat slumped in a chair, all his earlier bravado gone. "She'll pull through," Nurse Fowler reported, emerging from the treatment room. "It was a close thing, but we got to her in time. Digitalis poisoning. Foxglove. A smaller dose than what killed Eleanor, thank God." "Foxglove from my greenhouse," Peter said dully. "The same foxglove Nurse Fowler admitted to stealing." "I didn't poison anyone," Fowler protested. "Yes, I took some plants, but only for medicinal purposes. I can account for every leaf." "Can you?" Inspector Drummond interrupted, entering with Sergeant Collins. "Because I'll need to see those accounts. In fact, I'll need statements from all of you about this afternoon's revelations." "Inspector," Morrison stood, his face haggard. "Is Clarissa? Will she be able to tell us what happened?" "Not yet. She's unconscious, though stable. The doctors say she may be able to speak in a few hours." Drummond surveyed the group grimly. "In the meantime, perhaps someone can explain why Miss Ashford would be targeted, and why I'm only now learning about stolen babies and 25-year-old secrets." The story came out in fits and starts, with Grace Holt taking the lead in confession. Drummond listened with growing amazement and anger. "You're telling me," he said when they'd finished, "that this entire case revolves around illegal adoption, identity fraud, and a conspiracy of silence spanning decades?" "We thought we were doing the right thing," Dr. Pemberton said weakly. "The right thing?" Drummond's voice was scathing. "You stole a child from her mother. You lied to everyone, including the child herself. And now 2 women have been poisoned, possibly because of your right thing." "But who would want to hurt Clarissa?" Helena asked desperately. "She's the innocent party in all this. She didn't know." "Perhaps that was the point," Miss Marple suggested quietly, "to punish the innocent for the sins of the guilty." All eyes turned to her. Drummond leaned forward. "You have a theory, Miss Marple?" "Several, actually. But first, might I ask about the yellow thread found near where Clarissa collapsed?" Drummond produced an evidence bag containing the small piece of wool. "You noticed that, did you?" "Yes, it appears to match the bootie found with Miss Whitfield." "Which raises interesting questions," Miss Marple continued. "The bootie was in police custody after Eleanor's death, so either this is from its twin, or the killer retrieved it somehow," Drummond finished. "We're checking our evidence room, but so far everything seems secure." "There's another possibility," Miss Marple said. "What if there were more than 2 booties? What if someone made copies?" "Why would anyone do that?" Morrison asked. "To muddy the waters, or perhaps," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "perhaps to send a message. You see, I believe we're dealing with 2 different crimes here, possibly committed by 2 different people." "2 killers," Grace Holt gasped. "Not necessarily. 1 killer and 1 would-be killer. Eleanor's death was carefully planned. Poison in her tea, the bootie placed deliberately. But Clarissa's poisoning was hurried, almost panicked. The foxglove dose was wrong, the setting public and risky. It feels like someone reacting to this afternoon's revelations rather than following a plan." "You're saying someone in that room decided to kill Clarissa after learning she was Rose Delaney's daughter?" Drummond asked. "I'm saying it's possible. The question is why. What threat did Clarissa suddenly pose?" None, Helena cried. She didn't even know the truth until today. But others did, Miss Marple pointed out. And knowledge, as Eleanor proved, can be dangerous. A commotion in the corridor interrupted them. Millicent Price appeared, flustered and carrying her mailbag. "Inspector, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should see this immediately." She produced a letter. It was in the evening collection, addressed to Clarissa Ashford, marked urgent. Given what's happened, Drummond took the letter, examining it carefully. No return address. Posted this morning in Much Benham. He looked at Helena. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" Helena shook her head, but Miss Marple noticed how Dr. Pemberton had gone very still. "Open it," Morrison urged. "It might explain why someone tried to kill her." Drummond carefully opened the envelope, extracting a single sheet of paper. His expression grew increasingly grim as he read. "It's from Rose Delaney," he said finally, "or someone claiming to be her." "That's impossible," Grace protested. "Rose disappeared years ago," Eleanor said. "Eleanor said many things," Drummond interrupted. "Not all of them true, apparently. Shall I read it?" At their nods, he cleared his throat. "My dear daughter, by the time you read this, you will know the truth about your birth. I am sorry for the pain this knowledge must cause. I never intended for you to find out this way. I have watched you from afar for 5 years, since I returned to find my children. Eleanor Whitfield prevented me from approaching you then, convinced me it would only cause harm, but I've learned she's been using that knowledge, tormenting those who wronged me with hints and threats. I cannot let this continue. The past must be laid to rest, one way or another. If something happens to me, know that I loved you always. Both of you, you and your twin. I named you Faith and Hope, my miracle babies. That others renamed you, remade you, does not change who you truly are. Beware those who would silence the truth. They have killed before to keep their secrets. They will kill again. Your loving mother, Rose." The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Helena spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "She's alive. Rose is alive and here in the village. And possibly our killer," Drummond said. "A mother seeking vengeance for her stolen children." "But why poison Clarissa?" Morrison protested. "Her own daughter?" "Unless," Miss Marple said thoughtfully, "she didn't. Inspector, was the foxglove in something Clarissa ate or drank? The doctors think it was in a glass of lemonade she'd been drinking. Why? Because anyone could have drunk that lemonade. It was on the tea table, available to all. What if Clarissa wasn't the intended victim?" "You mean the poison was meant for someone else?" Peter asked. "Who?" Miss Marple's eyes moved around the group. Who would Rose Delaney most want to punish? Who orchestrated the theft of her children? All eyes turned to Helena, who had gone white as paper. "Me," she whispered. "The poison was meant for me. Clarissa only drank it because she was upset, and grabbed the nearest glass. It's a theory," Drummond allowed, "but we need proof, and we need to find Rose Delaney." "Inspector," Sergeant Collins appeared in the doorway. "The young lady's awake. She's asking for Mr. Morrison." Morrison was on his feet immediately. "May I see her?" "Briefly," Drummond agreed. "I'll come with you. The rest of you stay here. No one leaves until I've taken formal statements." As they left, the remaining group sat in uneasy silence. Miss Marple noticed how Dr. Pemberton kept checking his watch, how Nurse Fowler clutched her medical bag like a lifeline, how Peter Ashford's hands trembled despite his attempts to appear calm. 25 years, Grace Holt said suddenly. 25 years of lies, and now 2 women poisoned. Was it worth it, Helena? Helena raised her head, tears streaming down her face. "She was my daughter in every way that mattered. I loved her, raised her, gave her everything." "Everything except the truth," Grace said bitterly. "And what about Rose? What about her pain, her loss?" "Rose was a servant," Helena snapped, some of her old hauteur returning. "What kind of life could she have given those babies? Poverty, shame, struggle? I saved Clarissa from all that." "You saved yourself," Dr. Pemberton said quietly. "We all did. We told ourselves we were being noble, but we were just protecting our comfortable lives. And now someone's making us pay," Peter added. "The question is, who's next?" Miss Marple studied him carefully. There was something different about Peter now, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. as if he knew more than he was saying. "Mr. Ashford," she said gently, "you mentioned earlier that you wished you'd burned some papers. What papers were those?" Peter's jaw tightened. "Nothing important." "Important enough for Eleanor to blackmail you about?" "She didn't blackmail me," he protested. "She just hinted. Said she knew about my youthful indiscretions and how disappointed Aunt Helena would be." "What indiscretions?" Peter was silent for a long moment. Then, "I found out about Clarissa 3 years ago. Found some old letters in the attic. Put the pieces together. I was going to tell her, but then I realized, if she wasn't really an Ashford, she couldn't inherit. Everything would come to me." "So you kept quiet," Miss Marple said. "Yes, and I forged some documents to make sure, altered some records to strengthen my claim. Eleanor found out. She was in the library one day when I was adjusting things." "That's fraud," Grace said, shocked. "That's survival," Peter shot back. "You think I wanted to be dependent on Helena's charity forever? Watching Clarissa get everything while I got scraps?" "So you had a motive to kill Eleanor," Miss Marple observed. "Everyone had a motive. Look around you. We're all here because Eleanor had something on us. The only question is who acted on it." "Or who's acting on it now," Miss Marple corrected. "You see, I don't think this is over. The letter claims Rose will act one way or another. The attempted poisoning of Helena, if that's what it was, failed. What will she try next?" "You really think Rose is behind this?" Nurse Fowler asked. "I think," Miss Marple said carefully, "that someone wants us to think she is. The letter is very convenient, isn't it? Arriving just as Clarissa is poisoned, providing a motive, a suspect. You think it's fake?" "I think we should be very careful about what we believe. In my experience, when evidence appears too neat, too perfect, it's often been manufactured." Before anyone could respond, Morrison returned, his face grave. "Clarissa's asking for her mother," he told Helena, "and Inspector Drummond wants to see you, Miss Marple. He has some questions about your observations." As Miss Marple rose to leave, she caught Peter Ashford's sleeve. "A word of advice, young man. The truth has a way of coming out. Whatever documents you forge, better to confess now than compound your crimes." Peter jerked away from her. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do, and I think you know more about these poisonings than you're admitting. Be careful, Mr. Ashford. You're playing a dangerous game." She left him standing there, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. In the corridor, she paused, struck by a sudden thought. The yellow wool caught on the rosebush. She'd assumed it came from the bootie. But what if it came from something else? What if someone was wearing yellow wool when they poisoned the lemonade? The question was, who in the village still owned clothing made from that distinctive 25-year-old wool? And more importantly, were they planning to strike again? The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as evening fell, turning the village streets into rivers and driving everyone indoors. Miss Marple sat in Inspector Drummond's temporary office at the village hall, rain drumming against the windows as she shared her observations. "The wool fibre is the key," she insisted, showing him her notes. "Not from the bootie. The texture is wrong. This came from a garment, something worn recently. You're suggesting our poisoner wore something knitted from the same wool as the baby's booties." Drummond sounded skeptical. "It would be deeply symbolic, don't you think? Wearing the past while committing murder in the present." Miss Marple paused. "Inspector, has anyone verified that Rose Delaney is actually alive?" "We're checking now. The letter could be genuine, or—" He was interrupted by Sergeant Collins bursting through the door, water streaming from his coat. "Sir, we've found a body. In the old Delaney cottage. It's been empty for years, but someone reported seeing lights. Who is it?" Drummond was already reaching for his coat. "We're not certain. Female, been dead for several days. But sir, she was wearing a yellow cardigan, hand-knitted." Miss Marple felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "Several days. Then she died before Eleanor?" "Looks like it. And sir, there's more. We found these with the body." Collins produced an evidence bag containing several letters. They're signed Rose Delaney. Drummond examined them quickly. "These are the originals of the letters Eleanor had. But if this is Rose, and she's been dead since before Eleanor's murder—" "Then Rose didn't kill anyone," Miss Marple finished. "She was the first victim. They drove through the storm to the Delaney cottage, a tumble-down structure on the outskirts of the village. Police lights illuminated the scene eerily as they entered. The body lay in what had once been the kitchen. Despite the ravages of time and death, traces of auburn hair were still visible. She wore a yellow cardigan, hand-knitted in a pattern that matched the baby's bootie exactly. Poison? Drummond asked the police surgeon. Can't be certain until the autopsy, but I'd say yes. Same symptoms as the others, likely cyanide. Miss Marple studied the scene carefully. The woman's hands were clenched, as if she'd been holding something. Near the body lay a photograph, water-damaged but still recognizable. 2 babies in matching yellow booties. Faith and hope, she murmured. She came back for her daughters and found only death. But who killed her? Drummond asked. And why make it look like she was the murderer? To hide their own guilt, Miss Marple said. Inspector, I need you to gather everyone at Thornfield House, everyone who was at the vicarage tea today. I believe I know who killed these women, but we need to act quickly before they strike again. You think they will? I'm certain of it. You see, the killer has been removing witnesses, people who knew the truth. But they made a mistake with Clarissa. She survived, and a frightened killer is a desperate one. 2 hours later, the drawing room at Thornfield House was filled with nervous tension. The storm raged outside, occasionally illuminating the windows with lightning. Clarissa, pale but determined, sat between Morrison and Helena. Dr. Pemberton stood near the fireplace, with Nurse Fowler, while Peter Ashford lounged in a corner, trying to appear unconcerned. The Holts sat together on a small sofa, Grace clutching her husband's hand. Inspector Drummond stood before them all, with Miss Marple seated quietly to one side. I've asked you here, Drummond began, because there have been significant developments. We've found Rose Delaney dead. She's been dead since before Eleanor Whitfield was poisoned. The shock in the room was palpable. Helena swayed, and Morrison steadied her. But the letter, Clarissa whispered, was written by her killer, Miss Marple said, rising. Someone who needed a scapegoat for their crimes, someone who knew the whole story of the stolen babies and used it to their advantage. But who? Grace asked. Miss Marple began to pace slowly, her voice calm and measured. Let me tell you what I believe happened. Rose Delaney did return to the village, seeking her daughters. She made contact with Eleanor Whitfield, who knew the truth. Eleanor, being Eleanor, couldn't resist investigating further. She found the parish records, discovered the discrepancies, began putting pieces together. But instead of helping Rose reunite with her children, Eleanor saw an opportunity. She began hinting to various people that she knew their secrets. Dr. Pemberton's theft of medical supplies, Peter's document forgery, the truth about Clarissa's parentage. She enjoyed the power it gave her. That's Eleanor, someone murmured. But Eleanor didn't realize how dangerous her game was. Miss Marple continued, because one person had far more to lose than the others. One person who had built their entire life on a lie so fundamental that its exposure would destroy everything. She stopped in front of Grace and Timothy Holt. Isn't that right, Grace? Grace went white. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. You see, everyone assumed Eleanor was killed because she knew about Clarissa. But what if she was killed because she knew about the other twin, the one supposedly adopted by a family in London? But she was adopted, Grace protested. I arranged it myself. Did you? Or did you do something else entirely? Miss Marple's voice was gentle but inexorable. Inspector, I believe if you check the adoption records from that time, you'll find they were forged, just as the death record for baby Delaney was forged. Timothy Holt stood slowly, his face working. Jane, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Grace didn't arrange an adoption. She kept the baby herself, raised her as her sister's orphaned child, recently arrived from abroad, a child with auburn hair, and her mother's eyes. Isn't that right, Nurse Fowler? The room erupted. Margaret Fowler sat frozen, her face a mask of shock. That's insane, Grace cried. Margaret is my cousin's daughter. Is she? Then why did she react so strongly to the baby bootie? Why has she been stealing foxglove, not for medicine, but for poison? Why did she follow Clarissa into the garden with a glass of poisoned lemonade meant for Helena? No, Margaret whispered. No, that's not true. I'm afraid it is, Miss Marple said sadly. You've known the truth for some time, haven't you? Perhaps you found documents, or overheard something. You realized Grace wasn't your aunt but your adoptive mother, that your real mother was Rose Delaney. Even if that were true, Morrison interjected, why would she kill anyone? Because she found out the rest, Miss Marple said. Not just that she was adopted, but that she had a twin sister who was raised as gentry while she became a servant, that her mother was alive and looking for her. The injustice of it consumed her. Rose came to me, Margaret said suddenly, her voice hollow. 2 weeks ago, said she was my mother, showed me the birth certificate Grace had hidden, told me about Clarissa, about how Helena stole her while I was given to Grace like a consolation prize. Margaret, Grace reached out, but the younger woman flinched away. All my life, I've served others, tended the sick, cleaned up messes, always proper, always grateful for what I'd been given, while my own twin sister lived in luxury, never knowing want or hardship. Margaret's voice rose. It wasn't fair. So you killed your own mother? Drummond asked. She wasn't my mother. She was a stranger who abandoned me. Margaret was on her feet now, years of suppressed rage pouring out. She said she wanted to make amends, bring the family together, but I saw the truth. She wanted Clarissa, her precious daughter raised as a lady. I was just an afterthought. So you poisoned her, Miss Marple said, and took her letters, her cardigan, planned to frame her for Eleanor's murder. Eleanor was going to tell everyone. She came to me all smiles and sympathy, saying she knew who I really was, that she'd help me claim my birthright. Margaret laughed bitterly. My birthright? As if I wanted to be associated with any of you. But you kept the yellow cardigan, Miss Marple observed. Wore it when you tried to poison Helena. A piece caught on the rosebush. I wanted her to know, Margaret said fiercely. Before she died, I wanted Helena to understand she was being punished for her crimes, for stealing my sister, for reducing my mother to nothing. And Clarissa? Morrison asked. She's your sister. She's a pampered stranger who got everything I should have had. But Margaret's voice cracked. I didn't. I only meant to kill Helena. When Clarissa drank the lemonade instead. You tried to save her, Miss Marple said. That's why the dose was wrong. You diluted it at the last second, couldn't bring yourself to kill your own twin. Margaret sank back into her chair. All fight gone. I've dreamed of her all my life. The sister I never knew. And when I finally found her, all I felt was rage. Margaret Fowler, Inspector Drummond stepped forward. I'm arresting you for the murders of Rose Delaney and Eleanor Whitfield, and the attempted murder of Clarissa Ashford. As the constables led Margaret away, she turned back one last time. Her eyes found Clarissa's. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Clarissa rose unsteadily, tears streaming down her face. Wait, please. She approached her sister slowly. I didn't know. If I had known, would it have mattered? Margaret asked bitterly. Would you have shared your privileged life with your servant sister? I don't know, Clarissa said honestly, but I would have wanted to try. We're sisters. That has to mean something. For a moment, Margaret's face softened. Then the mask returned. Too little, too late. As she was led away, the room remained frozen in shocked silence. Finally, Helena spoke, her voice broken. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted a child to love. And in taking one, Grace said quietly, we destroyed 3 lives, 4, counting Eleanor. The past has long shadows, Reverend Holt said sadly, but perhaps now, with the truth revealed, healing can begin. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, suddenly feeling every one of her years. Justice had been served, but at such a cost. 2 sets of twins, separated by greed and desperation, reunited only in tragedy. What will happen to Margaret? Clarissa asked Drummond. She'll stand trial. Given the circumstances, the court may show some mercy. But she killed 2 people, Morrison finished. That can't be overlooked. As the group slowly dispersed, Miss Marple found herself alone with Clarissa. The younger woman stood at the window, watching the storm finally beginning to pass. I have a sister, Clarissa said wonderingly. All my life I felt something was missing, and now I know what it was. What will you do? I don't know. Support her through the trial, I suppose. Try to understand how we came to this. She turned to Miss Marple. Is it strange that I feel more pity than anger? Not at all, my dear. Anger solves nothing, but compassion, understanding, These can heal even the deepest wounds. As Miss Marple made her way home through the wet streets, she reflected on the case. Eleanor Whitfield had died as she lived, stirring up secrets better left buried. But perhaps some secrets needed to be revealed, no matter how painful. The morning would bring questions, recriminations, the slow process of justice. But tonight, the village slept, its secrets finally laid bare, its wounds beginning the long journey toward healing. And in her cell, Margaret Fowler sat alone, clutching a small piece of yellow wool, all that remained of the mother she'd found too late, and the sister she'd almost lost forever. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Miss Marple sat in the visitors' room at Holloway Prison. Across from her, Margaret Fowler looked thinner, but somehow more at peace than she had during those terrible days in June. "It was kind of you to come," Margaret said quietly. "Not many have. Clarissa visits regularly, I understand." A ghost of a smile crossed Margaret's face. "Every week, she's... The best things rarely are." Miss Marple studied the young woman. "How are you finding it here?" "Better than I deserve. I'm working in the prison hospital. It's good to be useful again, to help people without..." She trailed off. "Without the burden of secrets," Miss Marple finished gently. "Yes." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I've had time to think about my mother, Rose. I wish I'd given her a chance to explain, to tell her story. Grief and anger can make us do terrible things, but understanding can come with time. The other inmates think I'm mad, you know. A nurse who poisoned people." Margaret's voice was matter of fact. "But the prison doctor says I'm making progress, that the rage is lifting." "And your sister?" "Clarissa's been wonderful, more than I had any right to expect. She set up a fund in Rose's name, our mother's name, to help young women in trouble. She says it's what mother would have wanted." Miss Marple smiled. "How very like her. And the others?" Margaret's expression darkened slightly. "Helena writes sometimes, asking for forgiveness. I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe someday." "Grace?" "She testified at the trial, told the truth about everything. It helped with the sentencing life, but with possibility of parole in 15 years. Margaret met Miss Marple's eyes. "I know I should be grateful. 2 women are dead because of me." "Because of choices made long before you were born," Miss Marple corrected. "You bear responsibility for your actions, yes, but the roots of this tragedy were planted by others." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Margaret spoke again. "There's something I never told anyone. The night I poisoned Eleanor, she said something strange. She said, 'I wondered when one of you would finally do it. I've been waiting for years.'" Miss Marple's needles paused. "Indeed, how very interesting." It was almost as if she wanted to die, or at least wasn't surprised by it. Eleanor Whitfield was a complicated woman. Perhaps she grew tired of carrying everyone's secrets. Perhaps she felt guilty for preventing Rose from reuniting with her daughters 5 years ago. Or perhaps, Margaret said slowly, she was tired of being who she was. The village busybody, feared but not loved. That too is possible. Miss Marple began gathering her things. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" Margaret shook her head, then paused. "Actually, there is one thing. Could you put flowers on my mother's grave? Rose's grave. I know she's buried in the churchyard now, but..." "Of course, my dear. What kind of flowers?" "Yellow roses, for remembrance and hope." As Miss Marple left the prison, she reflected on the changes in the village since that terrible June day. Helena Ashford had sold Thornfield House and moved to a small cottage, living quietly and seeing few people. The grand estate had been purchased by a young family from London, bringing new life to its old walls. Dr. Pemberton had retired, his theft of medical supplies dealt with quietly by the medical board. He'd been replaced by a young doctor fresh from medical school, eager and idealistic. Peter Ashford, his document forgery exposed, had surprised everyone by confessing fully and accepting his punishment with unexpected grace. He'd served 3 months in prison and was now working as a gardener, finding peace in honest labor. The Holts remained at the vicarage, their marriage stronger for having weathered the storm of truth. Grace had become an advocate for adoption reform, working to ensure no child would be stolen again. And Clarissa, Miss Marple smiled as she thought of her. Clarissa had emerged from the tragedy with remarkable strength. She'd legally changed her name to Clarissa Faith Morrison, honoring both her mother's and her new husband. The wedding had been small but joyful, with an empty chair left for Margaret and a bouquet of yellow roses for Rose. As her train carried her back to St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple gazed out at the passing countryside. The case had been one of her most challenging, not because of its complexity, but because of its profound sadness. A mother's love twisted into theft, a daughter's pain transformed into murder, secrets compounding upon secrets until the truth became deadly. But there had been redemption too. In Clarissa's forgiveness, in Margaret's growing peace, in a village's slow healing, even in Eleanor Whitfield's death, which had finally brought long-buried truths to light. That evening, as promised, Miss Marple stood in the churchyard with a bouquet of yellow roses. Rose Delaney's grave was simple but well tended. Clarissa saw to that. The inscription read, "Rose Delaney, 1975-2025, Mother of Faith and Hope, the truth shall set you free." Miss Marple placed the flowers gently, then noticed another bouquet already there, yellow chrysanthemums with a card that read simply, "From your daughters." As she walked home in the gathering dusk, Miss Marple thought about the nature of justice. The law had been served, Margaret would pay for her crimes, but true justice, she believed, lay in the possibility of redemption, in the connections forged from tragedy, in the hope that future generations would learn from the mistakes of the past. The village had survived its trial by secrets, and perhaps in the end, that survival, scarred but stronger, was the only justice that truly mattered. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her favorite chair with her knitting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new puzzles to solve, but tonight she was content to sit quietly, needles clicking in the familiar rhythm, and remember a woman named Rose who had loved her daughters, two sisters finding each other across a chasm of lies, and the terrible cost of secrets kept too long. Outside her window, the first stars appeared in the clear sky. And somewhere in London, in a prison cell, a woman named Margaret looked at the same stars and dared, for the first time in her life, to hope.